Imagine a forgotten secret, just lying there right beneath your feet for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the thrill of what happened in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, a city, really thriving during the Byzantine era.
Right, that's 4th to 7th century CE, roughly.
Exactly. And starting back in 2013, they found this hidden crypt underneath a basilica.
And what they found inside was just stunning.
Wall after wall, covered in these incredibly well-preserved paintings, these decorations.
Yeah, pictorial decorations. And what's really captivating, I think, is that it wasn't just, a snapshot. It's like a story unfolding in layers.
Layers is the key word there, isn't it?
Absolutely. The teams excavating were so careful. They were conserving the decorations as they were uncovering them.
Which must have been crucial.
Oh, totally. It saved this unique record. You get a glimpse into the basilica's history, how Christianity was developing right there in that part of Egypt.
Okay, so let's dig into that, because it's not just one layer of paint we're talking about here.
Not at all. In some parts of the crypt, they actually found up to 5 distinct layers of plaster.
5.
Yeah, 5. Each one with its own decoration. It's like this archaeological time capsule, different moments stacked right on top of each other.
Wow. So how do we even start to understand that?
Well, our deep dive today, it really hinges on this exhaustive analysis the researchers did, looking at the stratigraphic arrangement.
Which just means the layers were put on. Like a cake, you said.
Exactly, like layers in a cake. And also the iconography.
The pictures themselves, the symbols.
Precisely, the visual language. By looking at both, we can start to piece together not just what they painted, but maybe when they painted it and potentially why.
So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to explore the most significant decorations across the crypt's main areas.
That's right, the main hall, the central chamber, and the north chamber.
And we want to figure out what these paintings tell us about how the basilica was used and the bigger picture of early Christianity in Oxyrhynchus.
And you asked how we start to understand it. It really comes down to meticulous documentation. They noted every layer, its position, the style, any other finds nearby. That detail is essential to untangle the different phases.
And here's something that really grabbed me. Alongside these amazing paintings, they also found over 150 pieces of graffiti and inscriptions.
Yeah, like ancient messages on the walls.
It gives you a direct link to the people who were actually in this space centuries ago.
Absolutely. It adds another whole dimension. But let's start with the main event, the heart of the crypt.
The main hall.
The main hall. It was the biggest space, nearly square, about, 7.8 by 8.5 meters.
Okay.
And right away, they saw at least 2 main plaster layers with decorations. They labeled them UV01 and UV002, visible everywhere.
And they divided the walls up to keep track.
Yeah, north, south, east, west walls, and then even smaller sections, tranches, they called them, just for clarity in the notes.
Right. Let's start with UV01. That's the most recent one. The top layer.
The top layer, yes. Found pretty much everywhere, up to about 2 meters off the floor. Interestingly, though, there were these continuous benches built along the walls that partly covered this layer. And on top of that, they found even later rougher mortar repairs. Those were labeled UE0320.
Okay, so UV01 itself, what did it look like?
Well, the surface quality was quite good, a fine white plaster, though it got thinner and, more degraded high up the walls.
And the decoration.
It had a clear scheme, a wide red band down at the bottom. Then above that, these vertical rectangles outlined in black, plafonds they call them.
Like decorative panels?
Exactly, like framed panels on the wall.
Were they all the same?
No, actually. There were 2 types that alternated. One type was this really cool imitation marble effect, ochre circles and ovals, to look like veined stone.
Oh, neat.
The other type also had marbling patterns, straight lines, diagonal, wavy bands, but sadly, most of the pigment on those has just faded away.
Ah, shame.
Yeah.
What is above these plafonds?
Okay, so at about 1.85 meters up, there was another horizontal red band, maybe 5 centimeters wide. And growing out of that band were green vine leaves and black tendrils. They were arranged in 2 alternating levels, sort of climbing up the wall.
So geometric panels below, and then this more natural vine motif above.
Exactly. A nice contrast.
And was there a hint of a person in this layer too?
Yes, just a small fragment above a niche in the east wall's north section. You could see the lower part of someone wearing a red tunic.
Wow, just makes you wonder what the whole scene looked like.
It really does. Now, digging deeper, underneath UVV01, they found UVV02. Pretty much everywhere in the crypt.
And this one was in better shape.
Generally, yes. better preserved than the layer on top, which is interesting. And the decoration was different. It started with a horizontal black line, then a wide red band.
Okay.
And above that red band, you had green and black olive branches. But these were hanging down, sort of convexly.
Hanging down.
They were attached by little black rings to a second, thinner red band higher up. It's quite a specific image.
It sounds it. Olive branches. Any significance there?
Well, maybe. What's really intriguing is the detail. Between the branches, under the rings, there are these red marks that look like Greek letters.
Letters. Like what?
The omega symbol was pretty clear, repeated kind of randomly. It suggests even small details might have had some symbolic weight.
Fascinating. What came next in this UV02 layer?
Above that second red band and the hanging branches was this really distinct, thick, geometric frieze.
A border.
Yeah, a decorative border, drawn in black outlines but filled with quite vibrant colors: blue, green, yellow, orange.
Nice.
And the source notes that the artist even tried subtly to give it a bit of a 3D effect. Shows some skill.
Definitely. Was there anything above the frieze?
Yes. Above a third red band, the olive branches appeared again. But this time they curved upwards, concave.
Ah, so hanging down below, reaching up above.
Exactly. And where these upward curving branches met, there was a flower, green-black stem, 3 red petals, maybe like a lotus.
Wow.
And right at the inflection point, the bend in the branch, there was consistently this little red V-shaped mark.
So much detail. Were they just painting this freehand?
It doesn't seem like it. They found preparatory guidelines in red synopia, the technical term, basically sketches underneath.
Ah, so they planned it out carefully.
Looks like it. And you remember we mentioned figures. In this UV02 layer, there's mention of 2 human figures on the west wall and another, less clear one, on the east wall.
Right. We need to come back to those specific walls. But first, those repair layers you mentioned earlier, UV1320. What about them?
Okay, yeah. These were definitely later. Made of this porous, kind of crumbly white mortar or plaster, not very finely done.
And they were just patched on top.
Sometimes small patches, yeah. But also found more extensively around doorways and openings, directly covering both UV01 and UV02.
So could they tell us something about changes, maybe things being removed or added?
That's the idea. The source suggests they might mark where old walls or doorframes used to be. There was even an imprint high up on the west wall that looked like it came from a vaulted ceiling that's now gone.
Interesting. So structural clues rather than artistic ones.
Mostly, yeah. These repair layers generally didn't have any pictures on them. There was one tiny fragment on the east wall that might have had some ochre lines, maybe letters, but it wasn't well preserved. Mostly just functional repairs.
Okay, got it. Now let's zoom in on the individual walls. The main hall's north wall. What did that show?
Right, the north wall. Well, UV01, the top layer, was partly visible. You could see the plafons, those panels, and the start of the vine decoration.
But some was hidden.
Yeah, partly because of the wall height that survived and also that bench built along the bottom. But you could still see some vine leaves just above the lintel of a niche in that wall.
And could they tell which type of plafond it was? The marble imitation or the faded bands?
Yes, they identified both types of UV01 plafons there.
What about the layer underneath, UV02?
On the north wall, UV02 was mostly visible just on that niche lintel. You could see bits of the red bands, the hanging olive garlands, and even 3 Greek letters. One was clearly that omega again.
Okay. How about the south wall? You mentioned it wasn't in great shape.
Yeah, the south wall's preservation was poorer, but still parts of UV01 were there. You could make out the plafons, the red band, a few vine leaves, especially in the eastern section, the east tranche.
Any puzzles there?
A slight one with the plafons. They estimated 5 of each type, which seemed a bit off, maybe. And there was some confusing plaster right down at the bench level. Made it hard to read clearly.
And UV02 on the south wall.
They identified it mainly in the east corner from those distinctive garlands and the second red band. And possibly, just possibly, a trace of the lower red band in the west corner. It really shows how patchy the evidence can be sometimes.
You really have to piece it together. Now, the east wall sounds like the most complex spot.
Oh, definitely. A real layer cake over there. You had UV31 inside the niches.
Right, the niche paintings.
Then UV03, this extra layer sandwiched between UV01 and UV02, but only in the north tranche.
Okay.
And then another layer, UV12, below both UV01 and UV02, but only in the south tranche.
Wow. Okay, so focusing on UV01 first on that east wall.
Right. UV01 had 10 plafons in total there, but the sequence wasn't symmetrical, probably because of the 2 niches interrupting the pattern.
How did the decoration handle the niches?
Interestingly, the red band and the vine leaves from UV01 went over the top of the north tranche niche, but they were interrupted by the south tranche niche.
Huh? Any idea why?
The researchers suggested maybe the niches had movable wooden doors instead of being permanently blocked. That could explain the difference.
Makes sense. And UV002, the layer below, did that also interact strangely with the niches?
It did, but differently. In the south tranche, you could see the usual UV02 sequence red bands and then the geometric decoration. Pretty standard.
But not in the north tranche?
No, completely different there. In the north tranche section of UV02, they saw red bands, yes, but then this green sort of spiky-looking vegetation, and part of a figure, a leg and foot in profile, possibly hair and a green band above.
A figure in profile. That's different from the others mentioned so far.
Exactly. Very different from the frontal figures we'll get to on the west wall.
Now, those niches themselves, you said they had their own special plaster. UVV31.
That's right. The east wall niches were the only ones with preserved plaster inside them, UV30 and UV31, separate from the main wall plaster, and only UV31 had paintings.
And what paintings? You mentioned Archangels.
Yes. Inside the north tranche niche, on that fine white UV31 plaster, a bit degraded, but you could see two Archangels on the side walls, one slightly turned, one frontal, both with halos, wings, maybe holding ochre-colored books.
Wow. And on the front wall of the niche?
A female figure facing forward, arms raised in prayer, the orant position, also with a halo.
So really sacred little scene inside the niche.
Definitely. And surrounded by that green, spiky vegetal decoration again.
Okay, now back to that sandwich layer on the east wall, north tranche. UV03 between UV01 and UV02. What was on that?
Right. UV03, poorly preserved, found above 1.80 meters. It showed two frontal figures.
Frontal this time.
Yes, and based on their clothes, they look like Roman soldiers, possibly in the style often used for St. Menis.
St. Menis.
A very popular soldier saint. It's even suggested these could be images of St. Philoxenus before his conversion.
Ah, interesting. What were they wearing?
Similar gear, short tunics, cloaks with dotted circles on them, black leggings or boots trimmed in red, slight color differences to tell them apart.
Any specific details? Gestures?
The northern figure's right hand might be in a blessing gesture, like Christ's pantocrator, or maybe just prayer. The southern figure actually holds a symbolic heart in his left palm.
A heart. Wow. Any other figures in UV03?
Below these main soldiers, above the niche, there were two smaller figures. One in a grayish tunic, one in ochre, both with tunic stripes, called clavi.
So a complex layer, even if poorly preserved. And what about UV12, the one below the main layers in the south tranche?
That was just a small fragment, UV12. It had a lower horizontal band and an upper one, both black, and importantly, it contained an incised inscription.
Another inscription, adding to the story. Okay, finally, the west wall.
West wall. UV01 was pretty visible there, especially the south part, the south tranche. Showed those templafons, clearly 5 marble imitation, 5 faded bands.
How about the north tranche?
Poorer condition there. You could only see parts of the upper vine decoration and bits of the plafons. Also, the access to the north chamber was blocked on this wall, but the blocking was covered by the bench and still had UV01 plaster on it.
Okay. And UV02 on the west wall.
Visible in the south tranche, you could see the sequence from the second red band with the hanging garlands up to the red lotus-like flowers. Only tiny bits visible in the north corner of the north tranche, though.
But this is where we get those human figures again, right? Near the doorway to the central chamber.
Exactly. 2 figures in UV02, seen from the waist down, framed by that second red band.
Tell me about them.
Okay, on the right, a smaller figure. Long off-white tunic with dark vertical stripes, these tabulae. A wide belt. An ochre cloak, or toga, draped over the left side. And interestingly, some lines on this figure were gone over again in red paint.
Reinforced.
Yeah, on the other figure.
Larger, to the left. Wearing an off-white toga with black folds, also draped over the left. But no red reinforcement on this one.
Different styles, perhaps different statuses.
Maybe. It's hard to say for sure. And remember that other fragment on the west wall?
Yeah.
High up in the south tranche, below UV02?
The one with the chain links. UV22.
That's the one. UV22. Small fragment, finely finished plaster, though. Showed 2 black chain links, one vertical, one diagonal. The idea is they might have converged higher up.
Representing chains for what? Lamps? Sensors?
Exactly, like the ones used for incense.
Yeah.
They found similar things depicted at other sites, like the Wit. It helps you imagine the actual rituals happening there. Lamps hanging, incense burning. Really brings the space to life. Okay, let's move on from the main hall. What about the central chamber?
Right, the central chamber.
Yeah.
This was basically the transition space, the corridor between the access from the main hall and the side doors leading into the north and south chambers.
And you mentioned temporary closures?
Yeah, there were imprints on the walls that suggested maybe temporary barriers were put up sometimes. And the accesses to the north and south chambers themselves were found blocked, but blocked in different ways.
Okay. How many layers here?
5 layers identified, UE101 to UE105. And interestingly, they found these without having to do any real intervention. They were just visible.
Any paintings on all of them?
No. The top layer, UE101, which was dark grayish, didn't have decoration. Neither did UE104, which was noted for having this network of fine incised lines, especially on the curved ceiling part.
So which layers did have paintings?
UV102, UV103, and UV105. The south wall here is the key spot. It's the most studied and shows all the decorated layers.
Okay, tell us about UV102.
UV102 was a grayish-white plaster found in the corridor bit and on the north and south walls. It had a decorative frieze, again around 1.8 meters high.
Another frieze, similar to the main hall.
A bit different. This one had 2 horizontal orangey bands. Between them were these horizontal 3-lobed floral motifs, maybe lotus, maybe fleur-de-lis, drawn in reddish orange filled with green.
Interesting. What about UV103?
This was super thin plaster, UV103, only found in small patches on the south wall, but it had a figure.
Another figure.
Yes, a slanted frontal view of a monk. You could see his sandaled feet, short-sleeved tunic with decorations, bare forearms, and he was holding a censer in his right hand.
Monk with his censer. Definitely religious imagery.
Very much so. Possibly set against an orange background within a red frame.
Okay, and the earliest layer here.
UV105.
UV105. Grayish plaster, but highly polished. Had dark brown or black and dark orange colors, maybe darkened from oxidation over time. This was the first layer put down in this chamber.
Where was it found? On the walls from the main hall access up to the side chamber doors, but mostly higher up, above 1.5 meters. Except on the wall blocking the south chamber access, where it went lower.
And the decoration on UV105.
Down low, near that blocked south chamber door, there were 8 small panels imitating marble. Wavy lines, circles, diagonal lines, different patterns.
Marbling again. Seems popular.
It does. Higher up on the north and south walls, there were bigger rectangular panels, also with marbling. Some circles and ovals similar to UVV01 in the main hall, actually. Plus other patterns, diagonal bands, wavy bands, straight bands.
Complex stuff. Anything else on UV105?
Yes, an upper decoration, a horizontal band, and growing out of it, more plants and flowers. Flowers connected by concave olive branches, similar to UV02, and also flowers on stalks popping up between the branches.
And there was a cross, too.
In the access corridor part of UV105, yes, a cross flanked by olive branches. It had the upper band, but not the flowers above or the panels below.
Okay, that covers the central chamber. What about the north chamber?
The north chamber was interesting. It actually had 2 distinct spaces, divided by a cross wall on the east side. And the walls here, north and south, were covered in numerous incised graffiti. Those are still being studied. But painting-wise, it seems there was only one main plaster layer.
Just one. And only one painting.
Apparently so. A single pictorial decoration found on the north wall, right opposite the doorway from the central chamber.
What was it?
It was a cross, but a very decorated one, adorned with painted gemstones and vegetal motifs, leaves, vines, used lots of colors. Green, black, ochre, red, blue, white.
Sounds quite elaborate.
It was, and importantly, on either side of the cross were the Greek letters Alpha and Omega.
The beginning and the end. Classic Christian symbol.
Very common from the 4th century CE or later, so that fits the general time frame.
Okay, wow. That's a lot of detail from these different spaces. So pulling it all together now, what are the big conclusions from studying all these layers?
Well, first off, it seems pretty clear the basilica complex wasn't built all at once. There were multiple phases.
And maybe built over something older? You mentioned a temple of Serapis.
That's a strong possibility, suggested by the sources. And one really big clue supporting multiple phases, maybe involving earlier structures, is that the crypt itself isn't perfectly aligned with the main basilica above it.
How so?
The crypt's east-west axis is off by about 10 degrees compared to the upper structure.
10 degrees, that sounds significant.
It is. It strongly suggests the crypt might relate to an earlier phase, or that the basilica had to be oriented slightly differently, maybe due to existing structures. And this misalignment probably played a role in why the south chamber of the crypt seems to have been abandoned.
Because it didn't line up properly with the support columns for the church above.
That's the thinking. Plus, the evidence inside the south chamber backs this up. No plaster, no paintings, no graffiti. And the access from the central chamber was blocked relatively early. Remember, that blocking used the UV105 cluster, the earliest in that area.
And you said UV105 had similarities to the later main hall paintings.
Right, iconographically. Which might give us a rough time frame for when that south chamber went out of use. Probably before the main UV01, UV02 decorations in the main hall were done.
So those main paintings in the main hall, UV01, UV02, maybe UV03, and all the central chamber murals, they likely came after the big five-nave basilica we see ruins of today was built.
That seems to be the case. They belong to the era of the current basilica structure.
But even the main hall changed over time, didn't it?
Yes, the evidence from UV01 and the layers below suggests it was originally a more open space, maybe 3 meters high, no internal dividing walls, no built-in benches.
And later?
Later, likely around the time of those rough repairs, UV320, things changed. They seem to have added vaulted ceilings, maybe supported by internal walls, similar to the side chambers. This would have made the main hall darker, more enclosed.
We have a date for this.
We have a crucial date. An inscription found on UV01 gives us what's called an antequem date.
Meaning, before which?
Exactly. The inscription is dated March 27th, 520 CE. So UVV01 and everything underneath it had to be there before that date.
That's a fantastic anchor point. Early 6th century.
It really is. And it ties in possibly with papyrus documents that mention repairs to a basilica of St Philoxenus around the 6th century. Raises questions about why they made those structural changes we see evidence for.
Interesting. What about the other chambers later on?
The central chamber seems to have become planar later. Remember, UV101 didn't have paintings, and the side accesses were blocked. Maybe its function changed, or it was used less. The murals being clustered near the entrance might support that, too.
And the north chamber.
That seems to have been sealed off, too, at different times. The access from the main hall was blocked relatively early, related to UVV01. The access from the central chamber was blocked later, related to UV101, plus that internal dividing wall. It suggests periods where it was separated, maybe used for something specific.
So chronologically, the main paintings we focus on, UVV01, UV02 in the main hall, UV105 in the central chamber, they probably date to after the current basilica was built, but before early 520 CE.
That seems the most likely window, yes. But the exact relationship between them, which came slightly before which, why they repainted, that's still a bit unclear. Maybe lower plaster got damaged, maybe styles just changed.
And you mentioned comparisons to other sites, Bawit, Saqqara.
Yes, there are some really interesting visual parallels. The geometric panels at Bawit look a bit like the UV02. The vine decoration there resembles UV01. Marbling, like UV01 and UV105, shows up at Kelia. The jeweled cross in the north chamber is similar to one at Deir el-Syrian.
Do these parallels help with dating?
Not precisely, unfortunately. Those other sites were active and decorated over long periods spanning centuries. So while they show shared artistic ideas in Coptic Egypt, they don't pinpoint the Oxyrhynchus dates much beyond what we already deduced.
And the painting techniques themselves. Any clues there?
Not really for narrowing down dates currently. They did note differences between layers and similarities to the parallels in caustic wax painting at Bawit, maybe Deir el-Syrian, fresco, and others. But it's complex.
It sounds like it. So much still being figured out.
Absolutely. It's very much ongoing research, multidisciplinary work, archaeology, conservation, art history, all happening side by side.
So the big takeaway for us, for you listening, is just the incredible richness here. These paintings in the crypt tell a layered story.
Exactly. A story of the basilica's history, its structural changes, the evolving religious life in Oxyrhynchus over centuries, and that 520 CE date is just so vital as a reference point.
It really makes you wonder, though, what do those different styles, the different subjects layered on top of each other really mean? Were beliefs changing? Artistic tastes shifting? Or maybe the community using the space just had different needs at different times?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it? What drove these changes we see frozen on the walls? It's a fascinating question to ponder.
It really is. And if this deep dive has sparked your interest, definitely look up more about the Oxyrhynchus excavations and Coptic art. There's so much more out there.
Absolutely. This crypt is a testament to the amazing discoveries still being made, whispering stories from the past.
An incredible window into history, hidden for so long.